This is the Truth Network.
He's a lawyer, an author. He loves this country. He loves his God, and he is on Truth Talk with us right now. If you haven't heard of Jonathan Emord, you are about to. If you have heard of him, you may already know about his passion to get America back to the greatness that God created her to be. Jonathan Emord, good to have you on Truth Talk, my friend.
Great to be with you.
This book, The Authoritarians, I'm reading it and I'm thinking, wow, how true so many things in this book. You've read a lot of books, but this one has a real prophetic tone to it in that somehow, some way, this anti-God, anti-family, socialism, Marxism, communism, whatever you want to call it, whatever it is by a different name or flavor, is crept in to America, and it's a poison. Jonathan, how would you describe what's happening right now in our country, and what gets your blood boiling about that?
Well, what we are experiencing is a spread of a kernel of evil that began in the antebellum South when slavery was being justified based on collectivism. A lot of people don't realize that in the antebellum South that they rejected the Declaration of Independence and Thomas Jefferson in their quest to defend the institution of slavery, and they adopted a thing called Hegelian collectivism, whereby they had this whole defense constructed based on socialism and communism. And it was based on the idea people. You can deprive them of their liberties and treat them like prisoners of war, and that would be deemed just because it would enhance the benefits of others who are of another race. And this whole concept, which is inherently evil, is at the root of socialism. So in The Authoritarians, I document the rise of socialism in America in the administrative state. And I remember when I first came to Washington in 1985 as a youngster, a young, fresh attorney, working in the Reagan administration with the Fowler administration at the FCC, and we were dedicated to implement an agenda that was set by Fowler for the president that would deregulate radio and television and would eliminate the fairness doctrine, which caused editorial control over broadcasting to be held by the government, not the owners of stations. And this was pushed by socialists who were in the administration, and they were in the civil service. I remember remarking, as I spent years in Washington since then, at just how prolific socialism was in the administrative agencies, people wanting to deprive you of your God-given rights. You know, the beauty of the Declaration of Independence is that Thomas Jefferson recognized there in the second paragraph that our rights are from God, that they are not from the state. And this Hegelian socialism that I talked about growing in America takes the opposite proposition. It says your rights aren't individual. They are collective, and they're defined by government, not by God. And so you have this atheistic society that is created under it. And so here we are. If you go all the way up in the book to February of 2020, you find the first time in American history a major party, the Democrat Party, agreed that socialism would be its position. They said at that time it was Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, within one day of one another, said that if Bernie Sanders were chosen by the Democratic Party as the standard bearer, that they would have no problem with that, even though he was a Democrat socialist, and that they would adopt his agenda, which is socialism. And that extraordinary thing went by without much media coverage, and of course, but it became a reality in the Biden administration, with socialists running agencies of the government that now make 3/4 of all federal law. So 3/4 of all federal law is not the product of those you elect, but the product of the unelected heads of the agencies. But at root, this is evil, and the reason why it's evil is that it takes away free agency. The Lord gave us free agency. He gave us freedom. He expected us to pursue our own course, not requiring us to adhere to the Lord's doctrines and laws. And so we instead have freedom. But what has happened in this instance is that government planners have taken over, and they have rooted out of everything from education to the economy the foundations of freedom. And freedom comes with responsibility. And so if you really want to create a Marxist state, which I believe these people do, you destroy people by causing them to tear themselves apart, to causing critical race theory in the schools to cause children who are of color to view those who are white as their oppressors and themselves as irredeemably victims who will never be able to succeed in life, who will regard every institution as hopelessly and irredeemably racist. This is, of course, bunk. But when you feed it to impressionable minds day in, day out, from preschool all the way through college, and you don't allow any dissent, you turn a whole set of generations into enemies of our republic, enemies of freedom, enemies of God's plan for man to be free and independent and to understand that through faith they could achieve salvation. Faith is rooted out of the public schools. Religion is assaulted. So anyway, this is what motivates me, and the vision that I have for this country is the antithesis of this. We can become free and prosperous again, and that requires specific action. We have to tame the regulatory state, defang it. A thing called the Congressional Responsibility and Accountability Act that I wrote for Ron Paul, he introduced into Congress, was never passed then, needs to become law, and it would prevent every regulation from having the force of law that was promulgated by an agency unless Congress adopted it, restoring the separation of powers, ensuring that Article 1, Section 1 is followed, and that only Congress makes law. And likewise, all existing regulations would be sunset within 3 years unless adopted as law by Congress under this bill I wrote for Ron Paul. We need to end critical race theory in public schools. We need to cut off federal funding to schools that engage in critical race theory teaching, predicated on the foundation that it violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 5th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution, which the Congress as well as the President are obliged to ensure are enforced. We need to get rid of this transitioning nonsense, which is butchering children, recognize it as child abuse, and likewise defund every school that depends on federal funding across the country of federal funds if they engage in transitioning.
Let me ask you about that, Jonathan. Let me ask you about that. Right now, if I go into my staff in my company and I talk to them about their sexual preferences out loud, that is full-blown sexual harassment. I could be written up, I could be fired, I could be fined, we'd lose everything. But you're saying a teacher in the public school system can talk to kindergartners, first graders, second graders, third graders about explicit sexual acts with a blessing of their government, completely talk about that with no repercussions. Is that
right?
True? And why is this? How is this even happening? And can you explain to people why this is a specific agenda of President Obama and the socialist regime? This is their agenda. This is not. I'm not defaming anyone. That's the philosophy that they adhere to. Or am I wrong about that, Jonathan?
No, it is their philosophy. They believe that children should have the ability and right to transition, by which the term transition is a lie in this context without question, because it's biologically impossible for a biological boy or girl to become the opposite gender. There's just simply not possible. All they have is cosmetic surgery, which is really brutal, to make a boy look like a girl and a girl look like a boy. And those things are encouraged by an environment that says transitioning is okay. And the administration, with the full force of law, is compelling schools to adhere to this on the notion that if you don't promote and encourage and coddle and support transitioning, you are discriminating against trans students. Well, let me tell you something. No child who is under the age of 18, in my judgment, has the mental ability to make such a profound decision as to alter their physical appearance by committing surgery such as mastectomies, hysterectomies, that have life consequences, and castration, lifelong consequences. And no institution should encourage or coddle children and direct them to think that their own birth gender may be a mistake. They lead kids to believe, to question constantly whether they really are male or whether they really are female, and based on their birth genders, and they ask them to accept pronouns which will indicate they're not aligned with their birth gender, and they encourage them to consider transitioning to be a fully acceptable course for a child. This is child abuse.
Okay, let me jump in here. I'm Stu Everson. My guest is Jonathan Emord. He's a lawyer. He's an author. He's spoken and advocated on behalf of the family for years. He's really, folks, he's your if you believe in family and values and whatnot, he's your best friend. He's trying to keep pastors out of jail. He's fighting against this evil hate crimes legislation. And is one of his recent books, The Authoritarians, he chronicles how the current leadership of our country is trying to implement socialism and trying to destroy the nuclear family. Jonathan, for the many people of faith listening right now who kind of say, well, that's politics. I'm not really going to get involved in that. That's for the politicians, and that's a whole corrupt space. I'm just going to kind of stay in my corner and pray and go to church and love my Lord and all that, which, by the way, is wonderful. But what's your word of them in terms of, your vote is your stewardship. God's put you in this country. We're not in a totalitarian government, even though our current leadership, who's crying for equality, they don't see themselves as equal to us. They're trying to pass laws to destroy our families and whatnot. But what can people do, and how important is it that people understand the worldview behind the policies and the politics that are driving all of this right now?
Well, people need to understand that evil is real, and that people are not always interested in your self-interest. The magnificence of the free market is that, as Adam Smith mentioned, you don't obtain your bread and your meat because of some motivation other than self-interest. It's the self-interest of the butcher and the baker that brings you your meat and bread. And that is a critical realization. It is important to understand that freedom brings with it prosperity, that this great country is great only because we have dedicated our nation from the time of its founding forward to individual liberty and individual sovereignty, where the people are the governors, where the state is to be your servant, not your master. When you shift that, when you make it the opposite, when you give government power to direct your life, and you enable the government to control every aspect of your life, where you allow the government to disallow you the privilege of going outside when that is not a privilege, it's a right, to go to travel where you wish, to think as you wish, when you allow censorship to happen and to be accepted and not to be rebuked, when you allow the President of the United States to use executive orders, that is, raw executive power, to insist that everybody in the nation who's in a company of over 100 people employed to be forcibly vaccinated or tested every week, When you have these kinds of things being done by craven people, lusting for power and anxious to destroy your liberty to enhance their own and their own power, this is the end of our republic. It is the end of defense for your individual liberties. We can't allow that. We cannot allow anything like that. We have to use that free agency the Lord has given us to be heard and to fight back. We've had a silent majority in America for too long. I believe it's opening its mouth and becoming very interested in fighting back. There is a way to fight back, and that is be careful in who you vote for. Be careful in who you support. Ensure that they are dedicated to tearing down the barriers to your freedom with the full confidence and knowledge that the history of the world has proven that the miracle that happened in 1776 in America, that gave us uniquely in all the world, both before and since, unique in all the world, the creation of a government that was instituted for the very purpose of protecting our liberties, where for the first time in world history, individuals had a degree of freedom that made them sovereign. We can't let this all go away. Those of us who love that freedom, who love this country because of it, and the world looks to us as that bastion of defense of liberty and is so confused by what the Democrats have done. If we don't stand up now, we are going to lose this country. And if we do stand up, we can have the greatest, and I believe this is happening, and I believe it will happen. We will have the greatest history, the greatest nation in all the world if we embrace individual liberty and freedom, if we embrace a free market. We can have anything. There's no limit to what we can achieve if we're free.
Well, and as it pertains especially to our Truth Network, folks, and this is a faith-driven show, Truth Talk. I'm Stu Everson, the host. Our guest, Jonathan Emord, author of the book, The Authoritarians. Believers should never put all their eggs in any basket other than Jesus. My pastor preached last Sunday on how the gospel is over everything. It's over my preferences for music. It's over my politics. But it impacts my politics, and it should influence how I vote and who I vote for, and I should weigh that in the balance as my stewardship. And if someone is promoting death and anti-God agendas, everyone on the ballot, Jonathan, is going to be a depraved human that needs the Savior. You know, so quit voting, quit thinking you're voting for a pastor, but take the stewardship seriously and vote for whoever is closest to the freedom and to the truth that we hold to, knowing that this isn't my kingdom. I'm a member of heaven. I'm a citizen of heaven primarily, but I can wield my influence as a believer on this earth and how I vote, and also in how I speak. And this is why I like talking to you. You're very gracious, even with your opponents. You're not shouting people down and yelling them and cutting them, but you're, pointing them and having good dialogue. There needs to be more healthy dialogue among people that differ. And that's the beauty of the great American experiment. But yet there's all this hate and race baiting, and everything now is a hate crime almost, Jonathan. And so I really appreciate the work you're doing. What's the best way for folks to find out more about your books, more about how to get the authoritarians? Do you have like a central website they can go to?
Yes, they can go to emord.com, emord.com, and also emord4va.com. And one thing I should mention, I'm going to have a very important announcement at the end of this month on January 31st. I have established an exploratory committee to consider a run for the United States Senate against Tim Kaine in Virginia. And
oh, wow. Okay.
Yes. And so, in any event, I agree with you that this nation is a nation founded on religious liberty, and that this government is attacking religious liberty, and so is the institutions of education across the country. Public schools are making it inhospitable for children who are Christians to survive in an environment where they encourage and allow such things as transitioning and assault on basic moral values. I mean, allowing profanity and allowing overt sexual displays without regard to the fact that individual religions are offended by those things, and indeed children are abused by those things. And so rather than protect the innocence of youth, and rather than respect and build a moral nation in which all children, regardless of religion, are protected from vulgar and overt displays that are designed to corrupt their morals and reduce them and make them more vulnerable to socialism, we need to focus on protecting our children. It is a parent's right. You have as a parent, you have an absolute constitutional right under the 14th Amendment, a liberty right, to raise your child as you think fit, to control their education and their upbringing, and no school should stand in the way of that. And we must never allow our children to be corrupted and destroyed like is happening in public schools across the country.
Wow.
Change is needed.
Change is needed, and there's a way to, by the way, there's a way, parents, to do that without being hateful, being gracious. Jesus said, you are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world. So there's a way to impact climate change. And I'm not talking about global warming or politics, I'm talking about the atmosphere you're in by shining the light of Christ and by going into these dark areas where they're putting pornography in front of our kids in school and saying, hey, this isn't going to happen. I'm sorry. I love you. We love every human being. They're made in the image of God, but we're not going to allow this to go on, and we are going to exercise rights as citizens of heaven and as citizens of this earth. And we're grateful for Christian attorneys like Jonathan Emord who have written and spoken and are passionate. You're passionate about helping anyone that gets stuck in all of this and encourage them. Thanks for coming on the show, Jonathan, and for being a blessing to us today.
You bet, Stu. God bless you.
Emord, EMORD.com. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
This is the Truth Network.